Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views magazine on politics in Africa and Arabia. Only 9% of those entitled to vote took part in the parliamentary elections in Tunisia. The opposition had previously called for a boycott. Voters' turnout in the vote on a new and significantly weakened parliament in Tunisia was low with this. According to the Electoral Commission, almost 9% of the more than 9.2 million eligible voters went to the polls before the polling stations closed. That's significantly fewer than in the previous parliamentary elections in the country. People no longer have confidence in the political process and the political representatives, says Malte Geyer, who heads the Konrad Adenauer Foundation's international office in Tunis. They don't expect any improvement from this election either. Tunisia's head of state, Kais Saied, dissolved the old parliament at the end of March in order to weaken his political opponents and expand his own power. Since the introduction of a controversial new constitution in the summer, the head of state has been able to appoint and dismiss the government and judges without the approval of parliament. The new representative body will only have a few powers now. The opposition, as I said, called for a boycott of the election. They accused the president of undermining democracy. The influential Tunisian Trade Union Federation UGTT, which has many members and has long stood by Saied, also called the parliamentary elections not very useful, as they put it. For many Tunisians, Saied was a beacon of hope for a long time, but his popularity ratings are now falling rapidly. Many people struggle to make ends meet every day. Food has become expensive and sometimes scarce. In shops, mothers beg to be allowed to buy more than the allowed 1 carton of milk per person. Sugar and butter are also rare these days. And more young Tunisians are making their way to Europe to find work and prospects there. So far, politicians have not found any solutions to the economic turmoil and high unemployment in the country. The leadership in Tunis is currently negotiating a $1 billion loan with the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, to avert national bankruptcy. The loan would keep the country going for the time being, but it won't get it out of the debt spiral, says Geyer. There is no politician in Tunisia who can really change the course. The parliamentary elections will not change that. The new parliament will consist of 161 MPs. In some constituencies, however, there are no candidates, so that the parliament will not be fully occupied until further notice. The Electoral Commission expected the first results by Monday, but we don't have a full picture when I'm filming this. Ex-law professor Saied also changed the electoral law before the vote. Citizens could now only vote for 1 representative per constituency. In previous elections, parties or party blocs ran with several candidates, including women. This obligation no longer applies. According to Human Rights Watch, in the deposed parliament, 31% of the deputies were women due to the quota system. The Tunisian parliament was once the model for gender equality in the region. With these new changes in the law, that could soon be history. That's what the organization wrote in a report. The parliamentary elections did take place on the 12th anniversary of Tunisian Mohamed Bouazizi's self-immolation. The greengrocer's death at the end of 2010 triggered mass protests and political upheavals in several Arab countries. Tunisia was the only country to make the transition to democracy. However, political power struggles and rampant corruption prevented lasting change. In view of the food crisis in parts of Africa, the United States want to enter into a strategic partnership with the African Union. We are joining forces to create a more resilient food system and improve the way communities grow, sell, and buy their own food. That's what President Joe Biden said on Thursday at the end of a summit with African leaders and the heads of government in Washington. This also includes investments in infrastructure that promote sustainable food security, as well as improvements in irrigation or grain storage. They are also working with the private sector to expand investment in fertilizers, among other things. The effects of the corona pandemic, the climate crisis, rising energy prices, and conflicts, above all the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine, had interrupted global supply chains and caused global food prices to rise drastically. The Ukraine war and blocked shipments of millions of tons of grain have further increased the risk of famine in the Horn of Africa. In Somalia, in particular, millions of people are at risk of starvation because of an unprecedented drought. Human Rights Watch blames the European Union for the abuse of migrants in the North African country because of its air surveillance in the Mediterranean and cooperation with Libya. The human rights organization published a report that is intended to prove that the EU Border Protection Agency Frontex uses planes and drones to locate refugee boats in the central Mediterranean and communicates their coordinates to the Libyan armed forces. Libya's Coast Guard then often intercepts the migrants and brings them back to the country, where they often experience torture and ill treatment, they say. Frontex is complicit in the abuse, said Judith Sunderland, Human Rights Watch Director for Europe and Central Asia, according to the release. Frontex claim to save lives is tragically meaningless, she says. For its analysis, the human rights organization, together with Border Forensics, an NGO that documents acts of violence against migrants at borders, evaluated official flight data and on-site observations by the German sea rescue team from Sea-Watch. In the report, Human Rights Watch states that the data on refugee boats obtained by the planes and the drones is shared only with the Libyans and not with other vessels nearby, such as civilian rescue ships or merchant vessels that might be able to help. The Coast Guard is asked to intercept the boats. And according to Human Rights Watch, the evaluated data shows that on those days when Frontex had been conducting intensive airspace surveillance, Libyan naval ships intercepted more migrant boats than usual. Human rights organizations have long criticized Frontex and the European Union's cooperation with Libya. They claim that Brussels' border policy over the past few years has been fighting migrants and refugees rather than helping them. As long as Frontex operations are designed to help Libyan forces intercept, the border agency and the EU should be held accountable for their role in the abuse people suffer upon their return to Libya, is what Human Rights Watch says. Frontex, based in Warsaw, was also asked to work more transparently. The debate was heated, but in the end, MPs stood by him. A majority in South Africa's parliament voted against impeachment proceedings for President Cyril Ramaphosa. A total of 214 MPs voted against, 148 in favor, and 2 abstained. After lengthy debates, the governing African National Congress, or ANC party, backed Ramaphosa, who is accused of corruption. The ANC has ruled South Africa for more than a quarter of a century, and they have an absolute majority in parliament. A week earlier, Ramaphosa had filed an application with the country's constitutional court to have serious corruption allegations against him reviewed. The president is heavily burdened by the report of a parliamentary commission of inquiry. Accordingly, the head of state, who has been in office since 2018, is said to have violated both an anti-corruption law and the constitution. However, his spokesman Vincent Magwenya described the report as clearly flawed. Independent legal experts also criticized that the report was largely based on unverified information and hearsay. The background to the allegations is a robbery that allegedly stole $500,000 from Ramaphosa's private cattle ranch in 2020. The president, also a successful businessman and multimillionaire, has reported the robbery, but not the disappearance of the money. His predecessor Jacob Zuma, who ruled from 2009 to 2018, had to resign because of a corruption scandal. The ANC, which emerged from the former freedom movement, has governed South Africa since the end of the racist apartheid regime in 1994. Two Ethiopians have filed a lawsuit against Meta, accusing the Facebook company of inciting hatred and violence during Ethiopia's civil war. Ethiopian academic Abram Marc and Amnesty International advisor Fisea Tekel submitted a constitutional motion to the Supreme Court in neighboring Kenya on Wednesday. In the indictment, which is available to the German press agency, Facebook is accused of spreading hatred and violence in order to generate advertising profits. Meta failed to allocate sufficient staff at its Kenya site to properly moderate content in African languages, it said. As a result, Facebook posts fomented conflict and killed people, particularly during Ethiopia's civil war, which claimed the life of about 500,000 people, the plaintiffs said in a statement. The document holds Facebook responsible, among other things, for the killing of Abram Marc's father, who was the victim of a viral smear campaign. Abram's father was gunned down outside his home on November 13, 2021, after multiple calls for his death on Facebook. His son unsuccessfully asked Facebook to delete the entries. Overall, according to the plaintiffs, Facebook's algorithm not only harmed Ethiopians, but 500 million people in Eastern and Southern Africa. The petition calls for a series of court orders to end Facebook's systematic discrimination against African users. Demands include expediting the removal of comments inciting violence, the hiring of more content moderators on the Nairobi Facebook hub responsible for Southern and East Africa, and creating a $1.6 billion compensation fund for victims of Facebook-incited hate and violence, and $400 million for similar damages resulting from sponsored posts. The German press agency could not immediately reach Meta for comments on this. The Ethiopian government and the Tigray's People Liberation Front, the TPLF, have been fighting a 2-year war since November 2020, which ended with a ceasefire and negotiations for a peace agreement just over a month ago. The research institute International Crisis Group described the conflict as one of the deadliest in the world. And this concludes this week's magazine on African and Arabian politics, but every day you can find more videos, and I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.